The Second Punic War was one among 3 wars fought between Carthage and the Roman Republic. The war was a power struggle between the already established Carthage and the quickly expanding Rome. They were called the Punic Wars because the Romans called the Carthaginians the Punics. Carthage was where Tunis is today in northern Africa. They dominated the sea, while the Romans, their empire spread across Italy, had their strength on land, mostly in their infantry. This dragged the Punic Wars on for many years as the battles went both ways.
Today we are going to reveal how the Battle of Cannae played out. The battle took place in Cannae, Italy on the 2nd of August 216 BC between Rome and Carthage. The Battle of Cannae was a devastating blow to the Romans, with almost all of their army defeated. Although they had a much larger army, Carthage managed to defeat them with powerful tactical strategies. The Carthaginian army was led by Hannibal. He was the son of Hamilcar Barca, who led Carthage during the First Punic War. The Carthaginian army was joined by African, Spanish, and Gallic troops. The total of the army consisted of 40,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry.
The Roman army was led by the consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. They were appointed consuls, executive leaders of Rome, in the elections of 216 BC. Because they each led 4 legions of soldiers, when the 2 armies combined to 8 legions, Roman law required each of them to lead the entirety of the army every other day. Varro wanted an all-out battle, while Paulus was more conservative, more towards using the Fabian tactic. The Fabian tactic is when one army tries to wear down the other army with smaller skirmishes. Because of this, Hannibal planned for an all-out attack on the day that Varro was leading instead of the day that Paulus was leading.
The Roman side was made up of 8 legions and their allies from Italian city-states. The 8 legions added up to about 40,000 soldiers with 2,400 cavalry. 40,000 soldiers were brought in by their allies along with 4,000 cavalry. This added up to a total of 86,400 soldiers.
However, like the majority of ancient battles, the sources that gave these numbers may not be correct, and there are different sources that state different numbers. It is certain that the Roman army was much larger than that of the Carthaginians.
The casualties, similar to the numbers, are heavily debated. However, it is not debated that a majority of the Roman army was decimated, although losses occurred on both sides. The Romans and their allies lost somewhere from about 50,000 to 75,000 infantry, and about 2,700 cavalry. 10,000 of their soldiers were captured. Paulus was also a casualty, which left Varro as the surviving consul. The Carthaginians lost 5,700 soldiers.
Hannibal used the terrain, positioning his army so that the Romans faced east. The sun would shine in the Romans' faces, and southeasterly winds would blow sand and dust into their faces.
Hannibal hid his moves by placing his light infantry in front of his heavy infantry. His cavalry was on the sides of the main army. Then he ordered his light infantry to fall back so that the heavy infantry was facing the Romans. The Romans advanced, using their superior infantry to best advantage. At the same time as the advance of their infantry, the Roman cavalry on the right wing now engaged heavy cavalry on the left of the Carthaginians. Hannibal's heavy infantry was being pushed backwards by the Roman army. To the Romans, this seemed to be because of their powerful advance. The truth was that the troops had been told to retreat.
The Carthaginian light infantry, who had pulled back at the beginning, had now taken position on the sides of the Romans' infantry. When the Roman cavalry was defeated, the Carthaginian cavalry surrounded the Roman infantry and defeated their cornered army. The Romans used the phalanx. The phalanx could be a powerful tactical strategy if used correctly. In it, soldiers held round shields to protect themselves, keeping a very tight line. They threw spears in between the gaps of the shields and men. The soldiers would be densely packed to let the rows behind them physically push the enemies backwards. However, because of the strong forward push, it was difficult to turn around, and Hannibal used this to his advantage.
The Battle of Cannae proved decisive, and afterwards many of Rome's allies joined Carthage's side. It also was a strong blow to the Romans' morale and their total population. They had a national day of mourning because almost everyone was related or knew someone who had died.
Loyalty was Rome, and bravery to death were very important for the Romans, which made them a formidable enemy. They never gave up and just kept coming. This was the same for the Spartans and many other cultures. In fact, those who managed to escape the Battle of Cannae were exiled, and were only allowed back when they were sent on a suicide mission, and all of them gladly went. If a soldier was found with a stab wound in the back, which meant that they were killed while fleeing, that man would be buried with no marker and no recognition.
The Romans were forced to rethink their strategies. Fortunately, Scipio Africanus would soon come to their rescue. For the Carthaginians and their allies, they would eventually be stopped, but not before heavy losses on both sides.
We chose this battle because this is a powerful example of how a strong leadership team can make a huge difference. Although the Romans heavily outnumbered the Carthaginians, and the Romans' strongest suit was on land, Hannibal was the sole victor of this battle. He managed to defeat them by careful strategic planning, thinking outside the box, and teamwork to execute a complicated maneuver perfectly.